What happens when a company's toxic leader meets his match? In Undercover Power, Ethan Parker is hired for more than just an ordinary job. He's there to expose the lies and manipulation tearing his new workplace apart. As he faces off with Ryan, the ruthless manager controlling the office, Ethan's real identity and mission remain hidden. But when the truth finally comes out, will he be able to take down the tyrant and transform the company for good? Stay tuned for this intense story of secrets, sabotage, and redemption. If you're ready to dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more powerful stories like this one. And drop a comment below. How do you think this showdown will end? Let's get into it. Ethan Parker stood at the entrance of Armstrong Industries, his hand gripping the cool metal handle of the glass door. The sleek, towering office building loomed above him, casting long shadows across the bustling city street. It was his first day on the job, but this wasn't just any new beginning. For Ethan, this marked the start of a covert investigation, one that would change the fate of the entire company. Armstrong Industries had been a name synonymous with innovation for decades, known for pushing boundaries in technology and design. But beneath the glittering surface, something was rotten. Rumors of discrimination, workplace harassment, and a toxic office culture had been circulating for months, casting a dark cloud over the company's reputation. Jim Hartman, Armstrong's founder and CEO, had reached out to Ethan directly, asking him to take on a unique and highly confidential role. Ethan wasn't here to simply fill a desk in the corner of the office. He was here to gather first-hand knowledge of what was really going on inside the walls of the corporate giant. The plan was simple. Ethan would go undercover as a new hire, immersing himself in the day-to-day workings of the company while keeping his true identity as Jim's chosen candidate for CEO a secret. It was an unorthodox strategy, but Jim trusted Ethan's instincts. He needed someone who wouldn't just sit behind a desk, making changes from the top down without truly understanding the rot beneath. He needed someone who could experience the culture from the inside and unravel the dysfunctions with precision. Ethan inhaled deeply, steeling himself before pushing the door open and stepping inside. The lobby was immaculate. Polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of modern lighting, and the walls were adorned with sleek, futuristic art that echoed the company's reputation for innovation. The receptionist, a young woman with a stern expression, barely glanced up from her computer as Ethan approached the front desk. "Ethan Parker," he said, offering a polite smile. "I'm here for my first day." Without looking up, she pointed toward the elevator bank. "Second floor. Your manager will meet you there." Ethan nodded and made his way toward the elevators, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble. It was clear that the receptionist had been conditioned not to waste time with pleasantries, a small but telling sign of the company's culture. Everything here was about efficiency, but Ethan wondered if the heart had been lost along the way. When the elevator doors opened on the second floor, Ethan was greeted by a man who exuded an air of self-importance. Ryan Caldwell, his new manager, was tall and well-dressed, with slicked-back hair and a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. His handshake was firm, but there was no warmth in it. The sharp suit, the forced grin, and the thinly veiled arrogance all painted the picture of a man who believed he owned the space he walked in. "So, you're the new guy," Ryan said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he sized Ethan up. "Ethan Parker, right?" "That's right," Ethan replied evenly, maintaining his calm demeanor. Ryan's smile faltered for a brief second, his gaze lingering a little too long on Ethan's face, as if searching for something. "Well, welcome to Armstrong. You'll be working under me in the management division. We run a tight ship here, so I expect you to keep up." "I'll do my best," Ethan said, keeping his tone neutral. Ryan led him down the hall, his stride purposeful and brisk. As they walked through the office, Ethan noticed the atmosphere was off. The open-plan office was eerily quiet. Employees sat at their desks, typing furiously or staring at their screens, their faces blank and devoid of expression. It was clear that no one here felt particularly happy or energized by their work. The environment was cold, impersonal, and it only reinforced the whispers Ethan had heard before taking on the assignment. They passed a group of employees, none of whom bothered to look up or introduce themselves. The only sound was the occasional clicking of keyboards and the low hum of machinery. This wasn't the kind of place where people gathered by the water cooler for casual conversations or laughter. This was a place where you put your head down and worked, 'cause anything else might get you noticed in the wrong way. Ryan stopped abruptly at a small, cramped cubicle tucked in the far corner of the office. It was away from the other workstations, almost isolated from the rest of the floor. He gestured to it with a smug wave of his hand. "This'll be your spot," Ryan said with a smirk. "Data entry and cross-checking reports to start. Simple stuff. Think you can handle that?" Ethan took a seat at the desk, the cramped space barely allowing for movement. The outdated monitor flickered slightly, and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee. It was a far cry from the corner offices with floor-to-ceiling windows that Ethan was used to in his previous roles, but he knew the value of humility in situations like this. Besides, he wasn't here to be comfortable. He was here to observe, to gather, and to understand. "I can handle it," Ethan replied smoothly, logging into the system as Ryan watched him with a satisfied smirk. "Good," Ryan said, crossing his arms over his chest. "We run a tight ship here, like I said. There's no room for mistakes, and I don't tolerate excuses. If you fall behind, you'll hear about it." Ethan nodded, but Ryan lingered for a few moments longer, watching him in silence, as if waiting for a crack to appear. When none did, Ryan gave a dismissive grunt and walked away, leaving Ethan alone at his new workstation. As soon as Ryan was out of sight, Ethan relaxed slightly and began to skim through the reports that had been assigned to him. The work was tedious, cross-referencing sales data, reviewing shipping logs, and compiling spreadsheets. But Ethan's real focus wasn't on the tasks at hand. It was on the bigger picture. He watched the office dynamics closely, noting the subtle power plays that were already becoming apparent. Ryan was clearly a man who thrived on intimidation and control. He walked the office like he owned the place, and the employees responded accordingly, keeping their heads down and avoiding eye contact whenever he was near. There was no camaraderie here, no sense of teamwork. People were isolated in their silos, afraid to speak up or step out of line. This wasn't just a toxic environment, it was suffocating. Over the next few days, Ethan settled into the rhythm of the office, though the uneasy atmosphere never wavered. Every morning he watched as his coworkers shuffled in, their shoulders hunched, their eyes dull with exhaustion. The culture of fear and control was palpable, and it was clear that Ryan thrived in this environment. Ryan, for his part, never missed an opportunity to make his presence known. He would stroll through the office at random intervals, barking orders or making sarcastic comments aimed at undermining his team's confidence. And yet, he always did it with a smile that suggested he enjoyed watching people squirm. One morning, Ethan witnessed this behavior firsthand. He had arrived early to work on a particularly dense report, and as the office began to fill with employees, Ryan entered the floor with his usual swagger. He spotted one of the junior employees, Matt Davis, who was huddled over his desk, frantically typing away. "Davis," Ryan called out, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. Matt jumped in his seat, nearly knocking over his coffee in the process. He looked up, wide-eyed, as Ryan approached with a condescending smile. "You still working on that report I asked for?" Ryan asked, leaning over Matt's desk, his tone dripping with false friendliness. Yeah, almost done," Matt stammered, clearly flustered. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. "Almost done. I gave you that task 2 days ago, and it was supposed to be finished yesterday. What's the holdup, Matt? Do you need me to hold your hand through it?" Matt's face flushed with embarrassment, and he looked down at his keyboard, mumbling an apology. "Sorry, I just wanted to double-check the numbers." Ryan cut him off with a mocking laugh. "Double-checking? Come on, Matt, we hire adults here, not children. Maybe you should focus on getting the work done instead of worrying about perfection." Matt's face turned a deeper shade of red, and he nodded quickly, returning to his keyboard as Ryan walked away, clearly pleased with his own performance. The rest of the office had gone silent during the exchange, with employees keeping their heads down, pretending not to have heard. Ethan watched the scene unfold with a quiet intensity. He could see the toll it took on Matt, the way his shoulders sagged after Ryan walked away, the way his confidence had been completely crushed in a matter of seconds. This wasn't just about a bad manager, it was about a system that had allowed people like Ryan to thrive. A system that beat people down until they were too afraid to speak up, too afraid to fight back. Ethan's resolve hardened. He had seen this kind of toxic leadership before, people who built their power by tearing others down. It was a culture of fear, and it was exactly why Jim Hartman had brought him in. But Ethan couldn't confront it head-on. Not yet. He had to play the game, gather more information, and wait for the right moment to strike. As the days passed, Ethan continued to observe the team dynamics and gather intel on how things really operated at Armstrong Industries. He noticed that Ryan's behavior wasn't limited to just public humiliation. There were subtler, more insidious methods of control at play. One afternoon, while reviewing reports at his desk, Ethan overheard a conversation between Ryan and one of the senior team members, Jenny Larson. Jenny had been with the company for several years and had always been a solid performer. But recently, Ryan had begun to turn his focus on her, making snide remarks about her work and questioning her decisions in meetings. "Jenny," Ryan said, standing beside her desk with a smug smile, "I've been reviewing the projections you submitted last week, and I've got to say, they're underwhelming." Jenny looked up, surprised and clearly confused. "Underwhelming? I spent a lot of time on those. They're based on the most recent data." Ryan cut her off with a dismissive wave. "I'm sure you tried your best, but honestly, I expected more from you. You've been here long enough to know what the standard is, and frankly, this isn't it." Jenny's face fell, and she quickly turned back to her screen, her hands shaking slightly as she pretended to rework the numbers. Ethan could see the cracks forming. Jenny had been one of the company's strongest assets, but under Ryan's constant pressure and undermining, even she was beginning to falter. Ryan wasn't just a bully, he was methodical. He knew exactly how to pick at people's insecurities, how to slowly erode their confidence until they were too afraid to challenge him. And because he did it in such subtle ways, most of the team didn't even realize they were being manipulated. Ethan watched all of this unfold with growing frustration, but he knew he couldn't act on it just yet. He had to continue gathering evidence proof that Ryan's behavior wasn't just a case of tough management, but a deliberate attempt to sabotage and control the people around him. By the end of Ethan's second week at Armstrong Industries, the tension between him and Ryan had reached a tipping point. Ryan had begun to notice that Ethan wasn't as easily intimidated as some of the other employees. Ethan's calm, confident demeanor seemed to irritate Ryan, who thrived on having control over his team. Ryan had tried several times to catch Ethan off guard, throwing last-minute projects his way, assigning him tasks with impossible deadlines, and making snide comments about his work ethic. But Ethan had handled everything with quiet efficiency, refusing to rise to the bait. It wasn't long before Ryan decided to escalate things. One Friday afternoon, just as the office was beginning to wind down for the weekend, Ryan approached Ethan's desk with a stack of papers in hand. His expression was neutral, but there was a glint in his eyes that told Ethan this wasn't going to be a simple task. "Ethan," Ryan said, dropping the stack of papers onto Ethan's desk with a thud, "I need you to cross-check these reports with last month's figures and get them to me by noon on Monday." Ethan glanced at the stack of papers. It was a massive amount of data, far more than could reasonably be completed over the weekend. He looked back up at Ryan, his expression unreadable. "That's a lot of data to go through," Ethan said evenly. "It'll take more than just a weekend to—" Ryan interrupted him with a smug smile. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. After all, you've been handling everything so well so far. I expect it on my desk by noon. No excuses." Ethan stared at Ryan for a moment, his mind racing. This wasn't about the work. This was another one of Ryan's power plays. He was setting Ethan up to fail, knowing that the task was impossible to complete in the given time frame. But Ethan wasn't going to back down. "I'll get it done," Ethan said, his voice calm and steady. Ryan's smile widened. "Good. I'm glad to see you're up for the challenge." As Ryan walked away, Ethan felt the familiar surge of frustration, but he pushed it down. He couldn't let Ryan get to him. This was just another test, another attempt to throw him off balance. But this time, Ethan was ready. That evening, after the office had emptied out, Ethan stayed behind, poring over the reports that Ryan had dumped on his desk. It was tedious work cross-referencing numbers, double-checking figures, and combing through endless spreadsheets. But Ethan knew that Ryan would be watching closely, waiting for him to slip up. Ethan worked late into the night, determined to finish the task. He knew he couldn't allow Ryan to use this as ammunition against him. If Ryan was hoping for an excuse to tear Ethan down in front of the team, he wasn't going to get it. When Ethan finally left the office, the city was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. He walked home in silence, his mind still focused on the task at hand. Ryan had made his move, but Ethan was one step ahead. He had dealt with men like Ryan before him, who built their power by tearing others down. And he wasn't going to let that happen again. The game had only just begun, but Ethan was ready. The Monday after Ryan's latest stunt arrived with the usual hum of the office, but beneath the surface, the tension was growing. Ethan had spent the weekend poring over the impossible task Ryan had assigned him, methodically cross-checking the reports and compiling the data with precise attention to detail. The stack of paperwork that had seemed insurmountable on Friday night was now neatly organized on his desk, ready to be submitted. Ethan knew Ryan had expected him to fail. The project had been a deliberate attempt to trip him up, a test designed to see if Ethan would crack under the pressure. But Ethan hadn't cracked. Instead, he had stayed late, working in silence, knowing that every report he reviewed was another step toward exposing Ryan for who he really was. At exactly 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the noon deadline, Ethan walked to Ryan's office, the stack of reports in hand. He knocked lightly on the door, waiting for Ryan's command to enter. "Come in!" Ryan's voice called from inside, clipped and professional, but with an underlying edge. Ethan pushed open the door, stepping into the office. Ryan sat behind his desk, scrolling through something on his phone, looking up only briefly when Ethan entered. "I've got the reports you asked for," Ethan said, setting the stack down on Ryan's desk with a calm, steady hand. Ryan barely glanced at the papers, his eyes flicking up to meet Ethan's gaze. "That was fast," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Are you sure everything's correct? I wouldn't want you to rush through something and make any mistakes." Ethan's expression didn't waver. "It's all there." Cross-checked and verified. Ryan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest as he stared at Ethan for a moment, clearly looking for some sign of weakness, some indication that Ethan had struggled with the task. But Ethan's calm demeanor gave him nothing. "Well, see," Ryan said finally, his tone cold. "I'll go through it later. If there's a single mistake, you'll hear about it." Ethan nodded once, his face remaining neutral. "Of course. Let me know if you need anything else." As he turned to leave the office, Ethan could feel Ryan's eyes on his back, the weight of Ryan's frustration palpable. Ryan had expected him to fail, and the fact that Ethan had completed the work on time without breaking clearly irked him. Ethan wasn't playing into Ryan's game. He was playing his own. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Ethan knew the quiet wouldn't last. Ryan's frustration would only grow, and the next move he made would be even more aggressive. Ryan was used to being in control, and someone like him wouldn't take kindly to being outmaneuvered. But Ethan wasn't alone anymore. Over the past few weeks, he had begun to form quiet alliances with several key people on the team, people who, like him, had grown tired of Ryan's manipulative tactics. One of those allies was Matt Davis. After the humiliating encounter with Ryan the previous week, Matt had been keeping his head down, avoiding any further attention. But Ethan had noticed something in Matt, something that told him Matt wasn't as beaten down as Ryan believed. There was a spark of defiance in Matt's eyes, a quiet determination that hadn't yet been crushed. That afternoon, as the office began to empty out for the day, Ethan approached Matt's desk, keeping his voice low so as not to draw attention. "Hey, Matt," Ethan said, leaning against the side of the cubicle. "Got a minute?" Matt looked up, surprised to see Ethan standing there. He glanced around nervously, but when he saw that Ryan wasn't nearby, he nodded. "Yeah, sure. What's up?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing his words. He knew that building trust with someone like Matt, someone who had been humiliated by Ryan in front of the entire team, would take time. But Matt had potential, and Ethan needed allies if he was going to bring Ryan down. "I've noticed the way Ryan's been treating you," Ethan said quietly, his tone measured but sympathetic. "The way he talks to you in meetings, the way he undermines your work." Matt's face reddened slightly, and he glanced down at his keyboard. "Yeah, well, that's just how it is around here. He does that to everyone." Ethan shook his head. "He doesn't have to. That's not how a real manager treats his team." Matt didn't respond at first, but Ethan could see the wheels turning in his mind. Matt was tired of being pushed around, tired of being treated like he wasn't good enough. But years of working under Ryan's thumb had made him hesitant to speak up, afraid of the consequences. "What are you saying?" Matt asked finally, his voice cautious. "I'm saying that Ryan's behavior isn't just tough management," Ethan said, leaning in slightly. "It's sabotage. He's deliberately tearing people down to make himself look better. And I think you know that." Matt was silent for a long moment, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. Finally he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I know." Ethan nodded, relieved to hear the confirmation. "I'm trying to gather information on what's really going on here. People are afraid to speak up because they think they're alone, but they're not. We just need to be smart about how we handle this." Matt looked up, meeting Ethan's gaze for the first time. There was a flicker of hope in his eyes, a spark of something that hadn't been there before. "What do you need me to do?" Matt asked, his voice steady. Ethan smiled slightly. "Just keep your eyes open. Document anything you notice anytime Ryan undermines someone, anytime he gives someone a task that's impossible to complete. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case will be." Matt nodded, his expression resolute. "He'll do it." As Ethan walked away, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had planted the seed, and now it was only a matter of time before more people began to see through Ryan's tactics. Later that week, Ethan found another opportunity to build an alliance, this time with Kelsey Turner, one of the senior analysts on the team. Kelsey was sharp, confident, and one of the few people in the office who didn't seem afraid of Ryan. She had a reputation for being tough, but fair, and Ethan had a feeling she would be a valuable ally. It was late in the afternoon when Ethan approached Kelsey's desk. She was focused on her computer, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked through a particularly complex data set. "Hey, Kelsey," Ethan said, keeping his tone casual. "Got a minute?" Kelsey glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, sure. What's up?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then decided to cut straight to the point. "I've noticed that Ryan's been making things difficult for a lot of people on the team. You've been here a while. Have you seen this kind of behavior before?" Kelsey leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest as she considered Ethan's question. "Ryan's always been like this," she said finally, her voice laced with frustration. "He thinks the only way to manage people is by tearing them down." Ethan nodded, glad to hear that Kelsey saw things the same way he did.
"I agree.
"And I think it's time someone did something about it." Kelsey's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression cautious. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm gathering evidence," Ethan said, his voice low. "Documentation of all the times Ryan's sabotaged people, all the times he's manipulated the team. Once we have enough, we can take it to senior management and expose him." Kelsey was silent for a moment, her gaze sharp as she studied Ethan. Finally she nodded. "I'm in. I've seen enough of Ryan's games to know that he's not fit to lead this team. Just let me know what you need." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of relief. With Kelsey on his side, he had another strong ally in his fight against Ryan. As the days passed, Ethan continued to quietly gather information. With Matt and Kelsey's help, he began documenting every instance of Ryan's manipulative behavior. Every snide remark, every unrealistic deadline, every subtle undermining of his team members was recorded and compiled into a growing file of evidence. But Ryan wasn't oblivious to the changes happening around him. He could sense that something was shifting in the office, that people weren't as intimidated by him as they used to be. And he didn't like it. One afternoon, as the team gathered for a meeting in the conference room, Ryan made a point of singling Ethan out, his voice dripping with condescension as he addressed the group. "We've got some new hires coming in soon," Ryan said, glancing briefly in Ethan's direction before continuing. "I'm hoping we don't get stuck with any more diversity hires this time." The comment hung in the air like a dark cloud, and for a moment, the room was completely silent. A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances, but most just stared at their notebooks, avoiding eye contact. Ethan remained silent, his face unreadable, but inside, the comment landed like a blow. It wasn't just an offhand remark, it was a deliberate attempt to diminish Ethan, to remind everyone in the room that Ryan still held power over them. But what Ryan didn't realize was that the more he pushed, the more people were beginning to see through his fad. By the end of the month, the tension between Ethan and Ryan had reached a boiling point. Ryan's tactics were becoming more aggressive, more desperate. He had begun assigning impossible tasks to multiple team members, clearly hoping that someone would slip up so he could use it as an excuse to assert his dominance. But with Ethan quietly documenting everything, and with Matt and Kelsey feeding him information, Ryan's manipulations were becoming more transparent. One afternoon, as Ethan was working on a particularly complex report, Ryan approached his desk with a smirk. He leaned over the cubicle wall, his tone deceptively friendly. "Hey, Ethan," Ryan said, his smile wide but empty. "I've got a special project for you." Ethan looked up from his screen, already bracing himself for whatever impossible task Ryan was about to throw his way. "I need you to compile a report on our year-end financials," Ryan continued, dropping a stack of papers onto Ethan's desk. "By tomorrow morning, senior management is going to be reviewing it, so make sure it's perfect." Ethan glanced at the stack of paper. It was a massive amount of data, far too much to process in the limited time Ryan had given him. But he knew that was the point. Ryan wanted him to fail, wanted him to come up short so he could use it as leverage. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I'll do my best," he said, his voice steady. Ryan's smile widened. "Good. I'm sure you will." As Ryan walked away, Ethan stared at the stack of papers, the weight of the task pressing down on him. He knew there was no way to finish it by the deadline, not without cutting corners, and that wasn't an option. But Ethan wasn't going to let Ryan win. He took a deep breath, reaching for his phone. It was time to call in reinforcements. That evening, after the office had cleared out, Ethan met with Matt and Kelsey in one of the conference rooms. The three of them sat around the table, the stack of financial reports spread out in front of them. "Ryan gave me this," Ethan said, gesturing to the papers. "He wants it done by tomorrow morning." Kelsey let out a low whistle. "There's no way you can get through all of that in one night." "Exactly," Ethan said. "But that's the point. Hez trying to set me up to fail." Matt frowned, shaking his head. "He's done this before to me, to Jenny, to half the team. He gives impossible deadlines and then tears people apart when they don't meet them." "Well, not this time," Kelsey said firmly, rolling up her sleeves. "We're going to help you." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "You don't have to do that. This is my problem." "Actually," Kelsey said, her eyes hard, "this is all of our problem. If Ryan keeps getting away with this, it's only going to get worse. We're in this together." Matt nodded in agreement. "She's right. Well, split the work, and we'll get it done." Ethan smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. For the first time since he had started at Armstrong Industries, he didn't feel like he was fighting this battle alone. They worked late into the night, each of them taking a portion of the report and methodically going through the data. It was tedious, exhausting work, but with Matt and Kelsey's help, they made steady progress. By the time the clock struck midnight, the report was nearly complete. "Well, finish this," Kelsey said as she closed her laptop. "Go home and get some rest. We've got your back." Ethan nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you." As Ethan walked out of the office, the weight of the day's events settled over him. Ryan's manipulations were becoming more aggressive, but with allies like Matt and Kelsey, Ethan knew they had a real shot at taking him down. The battle wasn't over yet, but the tides were beginning to turn. The morning after Ethan, Kelsey, and Matt completed the impossible financial report, the office was unusually quiet. The early morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor, but the energy in the room felt tense. Ethan sat at his desk, reviewing the report one last time before submitting it to Ryan. It was flawless, thanks to his allies. The data was cross-checked and precise. There was no way Ryan could find fault with it, no matter how hard he tried. But that didn't mean Ryan wouldn't try. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching the rest of the team filter into the office. He could see the toll Ryan's leadership had taken on everyone's tired eyes, hunched shoulders, and a palpable sense of dread hung in the air. But there was something else, too. A sense of anticipation. People were waiting for something to happen, for the tension to break. They didn't know about the growing rebellion forming behind the scenes, but they could feel the shift. Ryan's control over the team was weakening. Kelsey approached Ethan's desk, her usual confident stride softened by the weight of what they were about to face. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice low. Ethan nodded, keeping his tone calm. "I'm ready. This report is airtight. He can't touch me." Kelsey gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Good. But be careful. You know he's going to push back harder this time." "I know," Ethan said, his eyes hardening. "But we're prepared." She gave his shoulder a brief squeeze before heading back to her desk, her expression serious. The calm before the storm. They all knew it was coming. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Ryan called a meeting. The team gathered in the conference room, a sense of foreboding hanging over them as they took their seats. Ethan sat near the middle of the room, his back straight, his hands resting calmly on the table in front of him. He knew this meeting was Ryan's next move. The final battle was approaching, and Ethan could feel it in the air. Ryan entered the room with his usual swagger, a stack of papers tucked under one arm, and a tight smile on his face. He made a show of walking to the front of the room, deliberately taking his time, making sure everyone's eyes were on him. His expression was calm, but there was an edge of tension in his posture and undercurrent of desperation that Ethan recognized immediately. Once everyone was seated, Ryan cleared his throat and addressed the team. "All right, let's get started. We have a lot to cover today, including a review of the financial report I requested from Ethan." There it was. The moment Ryan had been waiting for, the moment where he expected Ethan to stumble, to fail in front of the entire team. But Ethan had anticipated this, and he was ready. Ryan began by reviewing a few mundane updates, but the tension in the room was building. Everyone knew this meeting wasn't just about routine business. Ryan was setting the stage for something personal. Finally, Ryan shifted the conversation to the financial report. He held up the stack of papers Ethan had submitted, flipping through them with exaggerated care, his eyes scanning the pages as if searching for errors. "The financial report," Ryan began, his tone casual but with an unmistakable undercurrent of condescension. "I asked Ethan to compile this data on short notice, and I have to say..." He paused, letting the silence stretch out, making sure everyone was on the edge of their seats. "It's pretty thorough." His tone held a grudging respect, but there was something more. Ethan could sense that Ryan wasn't done yet. This wasn't a compliment, it was a setup. "But," Ryan continued, his eyes locking onto Ethan, "there are still a few things I'd like to address." Ethan met Ryan's gaze calmly, waiting for the inevitable attack. Ryan flipped to one of the later pages in the report, holding it up for the team to see. "There's a discrepancy here in the Q3 projections. The numbers don't seem to align with the data we received from the marketing team." Ethan didn't flinch. "The data came directly from the marketing team's report," he said evenly. "I cross-checked everything before submitting it. If there's a discrepancy, it's because the data they provided was outdated." Ryan's smile faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. "I see. Well, perhaps next time we can double-check the sources before submitting something to senior management." There was a subtle murmur around the room, but no one spoke up. Ethan knew Ryan was trying to plant seeds of doubt, to make it seem like Ethan had been careless. But Ethan had the facts on his side, and Ryan knew it. "He'll be sure to double-check in the future," Ethan said calmly, his tone giving nothing away. "But as I said, the data was accurate based on what was provided." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded, clearly sensing that the room was on his side. He had hoped to rattle Ethan, but it wasn't working. Good, Ryan said finally, closing the report and setting it down on the table. Let's move on. The rest of the meeting passed without incident, but the tension between Ethan and Ryan was palpable. It was clear to everyone in the room that this was no longer just about a financial report. This was a battle for control, and the stakes were getting higher. After the meeting, Ethan returned to his desk, his mind buzzing with the events of the morning. Ryan's attack had been subtle, but it was the first real sign that Ryan was feeling threatened. He hadn't been able to find a flaw in Ethan's work, but that wouldn't stop him from trying again. Ryan wasn't done yet, and Ethan knew the next move would be even more calculated. As the day wore on, Kelsey stopped by Ethan's desk again, her expression serious. "You handled that well," she said quietly, leaning against the edge of the cubicle. "But Ryan's not going to let this go. He's getting desperate." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the office as he spoke. "I know. But we're ready. He's running out of moves." Kelsey glanced around the office, lowering her voice even further. "He's going to try something bigger next time. We need to be prepared." "We are," Ethan assured her. "I've been documenting everything. Every report, every email, every conversation. When the time comes, we'll have the evidence we need to take him down." Kelsey nodded, but there was still a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Just be careful. He's more dangerous now than ever." Ethan met her gaze, his expression resolute. "I know. But I'm not backing down." Kelsey gave him a small, tight smile before heading back to her desk. Ethan watched her go, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the entire team, the entire company. Ryan's reign of manipulation and intimidation was coming to an end, but the fight wasn't over yet. The following week, Ryan made his next move. It started with a company-wide email, sent out early Monday morning. The subject line was vague, urgent company meeting on Friday, attendance required. Ethan's stomach twisted as he read the message. This wasn't just another routine meeting. Ryan was planning something big. And whatever it wasn't going to be good. The rest of the team seemed to sense it too. There was a noticeable tension in the air as people read the email, exchanging nervous glances as they whispered among themselves. Ryan had been quiet since the financial report meeting, and everyone knew that when Ryan was quiet, it meant he was plotting. Ethan spent the next few days on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. He had expected Ryan to retaliate, but he hadn't anticipated this level of silence. It was unsettling, and it made Ethan wonder just how far Ryan was willing to go to protect his position. Finally, Friday arrived, and the team gathered in the large conference room for the meeting. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as people filed in, taking their seats and exchanging hushed conversations. Ethan sat near the back, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of what was to come. Ryan entered the room a few minutes later, his expression unreadable. He walked to the front of the room with his usual air of authority, but there was something different about him this time, something colder, more calculating. "Thank you all for coming," Ryan began, his voice calm but carrying an edge of tension. "I've called this meeting to address some important changes that are happening within the company." Ethan felt his heart rate quicken. This wasn't going to be good. Ryan continued, his tone growing more formal. "As you all know, we've been going through a period of transition, and with that comes the need for strong leadership. Unfortunately, I've recently become aware of certain concerns regarding the performance of some of our team members." Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew where this was going. "These concerns," Ryan continued, his eyes scanning the room, "have come to my attention through various channels, and it's clear that we need to take action to address them." The room was deathly silent as Ryan spoke. Everyone was waiting for the hammer to fall. "I'm not here to single anyone out," Ryan said, though his gaze lingered on Ethan for a moment too long. "But it's important that we maintain a high standard of performance, especially as we move forward with some major projects. Anyone who doesn't meet those standards will need to be held accountable." Ethan's jaw tightened. This was Ryan's final play. He was setting the stage to push Ethan out, to discredit him in front of the entire team. But Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. "I'm confident that we can get through this period of transition," Ryan said, his voice smooth but cold. "But it's going to require all of us to step up and perform at our best." As the meeting wrapped up, Ryan gave a final nod to the team before dismissing them. People began filing out of the room, but Ethan stayed seated, his mind racing. Ryan had just made his move, and it was clear that the next few days would be critical. But Ethan wasn't done yet. He had one last card to play, and he was going to make sure it counted. The Monday after the tense company-wide meeting, Ethan could feel the shift in the office atmosphere. Ryan had laid the groundwork for his final play, and now it was only a matter of time before he made his move to discredit Ethan in front of senior management.
Ethan knew it was coming. Ryan was too desperate to let things slide.
His grip on the team was slipping, and he would do anything to regain control. But Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. Over the weekend, Ethan had met with Kelsey and Matt to finalize their strategy. They had spent hours going over the evidence they had gathered, emails, project notes, and documentation of Ryan's manipulative behavior. With Kelsey's sharp eye for detail and Matt's first-hand accounts, they had built a strong case, one that could expose Ryan's sabotage for what it was. Now, it was just a matter of timing. Ethan sat at his desk on Monday morning, his eyes scanning the office as people trickled in. The tension from Friday's meeting still hung in the air, but there was also a sense of quiet anticipation. People were waiting for something to happen, waiting for the moment when the battle between Ethan and Ryan would finally come to a head. Kelsey approached his desk, her expression serious but composed. "Are you ready for this?" she asked in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'm ready. We've got everything we need." Kelsey gave him a brief, encouraging smile. "Good. Just remember, he's going to try to provoke you. Don't give him the satisfaction." "I won't," Ethan said, his voice steady. "This is about the truth, not revenge." She nodded again before heading back to her desk, leaving Ethan to his thoughts. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now the final confrontation was imminent. Later that morning, Ryan called another meeting, a much smaller one this time, limited to just the senior members of the team. Ethan, Kelsey, and a few others gathered in the conference room, their expressions tense as they waited for Ryan to arrive. When Ryan walked in, he had that same smug confidence Ethan had seen before. It felt more forced, more brittle. Ryan knew he was walking a thin line, and it was clear he was ready to push Ethan to the edge. "Thank you all for coming," Ryan said, his tone formal, but with an undercurrent of tension. He took his seat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Ethan. "I wanted to discuss some performance concerns I've noticed recently," Ryan continued, his voice calm but laced with accusation. "Specifically regarding the projects led by Ethan." The room fell silent. Ethan could feel everyone's eyes on him, the weight of Ryan's words sinking in. This was it, the moment Ryan had been building toward. He was setting the stage to publicly discredit Ethan, to paint him as incompetent in front of the team. But Ethan wasn't going to sit back and let it happen. Ryan continued, flipping through a folder of documents. "There have been several issues with deadlines not being met, data being mishandled, and frankly, a lack of attention to detail in some of the recent reports." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting Ryan dig his own hole. Ryan glanced up, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. "I'd like to hear from you, Ethan. What's your explanation for these performance issues?" Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder of his own, filled with the documentation he had been gathering for weeks. He placed it on the table, his expression calm but firm. "I don't believe the performance issues you're talking about are mine, Ryan," Ethan said evenly, meeting Ryan's gaze without flinching. "In fact, I think the evidence will show that the real problem is how you've been sabotaging my work." The room went dead silent. Ryan's smug smile faltered for just a second before he recovered, but the shift in his demeanor was unmistakable. "What are you talking about?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with barely contained anger. Ethan opened the folder, sliding copies of emails and project notes across the table to the senior team members. "These are communications between you and me, between the departments involved in the recent projects. They show that you deliberately gave me incomplete data, set impossible deadlines, and withheld critical information to make sure I couldn't succeed." Ryan's face flushed red, but Ethan didn't stop. I've also documented instances where you undermined other members of the team, Ethan continued, his voice gaining strength. Matt, for example, was given a project with conflicting data and unrealistic deadlines, which you then used as an excuse to criticize him in front of the entire team. Matt, seated across the table, nodded slightly, his expression grim. He had been waiting for this moment too. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he tried to regain control of the situation. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "You're just trying to cover for your own mistakes." Ethan met his gaze head-on. "I'm not covering for anything. I'm exposing the truth." Ryan's eyes flicked around the room, searching for support, but he found none. Kelsey had already reviewed the evidence and was standing firmly by Ethan's side, and Matt's quiet nod had sealed the deal. The rest of the team remained silent, but their expressions were telling. They had seen enough of Ryan's behavior over the past few weeks to know that Ethan wasn't lying. "You've been using your position to manipulate the team, to undermine people who threaten your control," Ethan said, his voice steady. "And it stops now." For a moment, the room was completely still, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Ryan sat frozen, his face pale with anger and disbelief. He had never expected Ethan to push back like this, to expose his tactics so publicly. Finally, Ryan stood abruptly, his fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Ethan didn't flinch. "Yes, it is." After the meeting, the atmosphere in the office was electric. Whispers spread like wildfire as people pieced together what had happened behind the closed doors of the conference room. Ryan had stormed out, his anger palpable, but Ethan had stayed calm, knowing that the battle was nearly over. Later that afternoon, Ethan received an email from Jessica Collins, the head of HR. She had been keeping a close eye on the situation since Ethan had first approached her weeks ago, and now, with the evidence in hand, it was time to act. Subject: HR review, Ryan Caldwell. "Ethan, I've reviewed the documentation you provided, and it's clear that Ryan's behavior warrants further investigation. Well, be moving forward with a formal review of his actions, and I'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss next steps. Best, Jessica." Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling over him. The final confrontation was coming, and this time, Ryan wouldn't be able to escape the consequences of his actions. The next morning, Ethan walked into Jessica's office with the folder of evidence in hand, ready for what came next. Jessica greeted him with a warm but professional smile, gesturing for him to sit. "Ethan," she said, her tone serious but supportive, "I've gone through everything you sent me, and I have to say, this is a lot more than we originally thought. Ryan's been manipulating his team for a long time." Ethan nodded, his expression resolute. "He's been using his position to tear people down, to sabotage anyone who threatens his control. It's not just Meets, the whole team." Jessica sighed, her expression thoughtful as she considered the situation. "I had my suspicions, but it's clear now that we need to take immediate action. Ryan's behavior is unacceptable, and it's created a toxic work environment." "So, what happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "We're going to have a formal meeting with Ryan this afternoon. HR will present the evidence and we'll give him a chance to respond. Based on that meeting, we'll make a final decision, but given what we've uncovered, I don't see any way he's staying at Armstrong." Ethan exhaled, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. This was the moment he had been working toward, the moment where Ryan's reign of manipulation and sabotage would finally come to an end. "Thank you, Jessica," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I appreciate everything you've done." Jessica smiled, her eyes softening. "You've done the hard work, Ethan. You've stood up for yourself and your team. That's leadership." That afternoon, the HR meeting was held in the largest conference room at Armstrong Industries. Ryan walked in, his face pale and drawn, but his posture still stiff with defiance. He knew what was coming, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Jessica and a few other senior HR managers sat at the table, the folder of evidence in front of them. Ethan sat at the far end, his heart pounding but his face calm. This was it, the final showdown. The meeting began with Jessica laying out the case against Ryan. going over the documentation of his manipulative behavior, the impossible deadlines, the sabotaged projects. As she spoke, Ryan's face grew tighter, his jaw clenching as he listened in silence. Finally, when Jessica finished, she turned to Ryan. "Ryan, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Ryan stood slowly, his fists clenched at his sides as he glared at Jessica, then at Ethan. "This is a witch hunt," he spat, his voice shaking with anger. "I've been with this company for years. I've given everything to Armstrong, and this is how I'm repaid, with lies and betrayal." Jessica's expression remained calm. "This isn't about loyalty, Ryan. This is about your behavior, about how you've treated your team." Ryan's face flushed red, but he said nothing. He knew he was cornered, and there was no way out. "We've made our decision," Jessica said, her tone final. "Effective immediately, you're suspended from your position, pending further review. Security will escort you from the building." Ryan stared at her, his face pale with disbelief. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice filled with desperation. "It's already done," Jessica said, standing as the security team entered the room. Ryan didn't say another word. He stood there for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides, before turning on his heel and storming out of the room. Ethan watched him go, feeling a sense of finality settle over him. It was over. Ryan was gone. The next few days at Armstrong Industries felt like a new world. The oppressive weight of Ryan's leadership was gone, and the team moved through the office with a sense of freedom they hadn't experienced in years. Ethan sat at his desk, reviewing the latest project reports with a clear mind. For the first time since he had started at Armstrong, he felt at peace. The battle was over, and the future of the company looked brighter than ever. Kelsey stopped by his desk, a smile spreading across her face. "I just heard the news," she said, her voice filled with relief. "Ryan's officially terminated." Ethan smiled, the weight of the moment finally hitting him. "It's over." Kelsey nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thanks to you." Ethan shook his head. "Thanks to all of us. This was a team effort." As Kelsey walked away, Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching the office around him. The battle had been hard fought, but it had been worth it. Armstrong Industries was finally free from the toxic influence that had held it back for so long. And now, it was time to rebuild, to create a company where people were valued, respected, and empowered. A company where the future was bright. Ethan smiled to himself, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had won. But more importantly, the team had won. The future was theirs. The days following Ryan's departure from Armstrong Industries felt like the calm after a storm. The tension that had once filled every corner of the office was gone, leaving behind a sense of cautious optimism. People were still adjusting to the sudden change, but the mood was noticeably lighter. Employees who had once kept their heads down, afraid of drawing Ryan's ire, were now talking more freely, engaging with one another in ways Ethan hadn't seen since he first arrived. But for Ethan, the real work was just beginning. Ryan's dismissal had been necessary, but it was only the first step. The toxic culture that had taken root under his leadership wouldn't disappear overnight. There were wounds that needed to heal, trust that needed to be rebuilt, and a company-wide shift that had to take place if Armstrong was to truly thrive again. Ethan sat at his desk early one morning, going over a list of initiatives he planned to introduce over the coming weeks. His goal was simple: to create a workplace where people felt respected, valued, and heard. But making that vision a reality would take time, patience, and careful planning. The first step, he knew, was addressing the team directly. He had already spoken with Jessica, and they had agreed to hold a company-wide meeting to outline the changes that were coming, and to give everyone a chance to voice their concerns. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, and as the time drew closer, Ethan felt a familiar tension in his chest. This wasn't just about leading a meeting, it was about setting the tone for the future of Armstrong Industries. If he could earn the team's trust, they could move forward together. If not, the cracks left by Ryan's toxic leadership would only deepen. When the time came, the conference room was filled with employees, their faces a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope. Ethan stood at the front of the room, his expression calm but serious as he prepared to speak. Jessica stood beside him, offering silent support. "Thank you all for coming," Ethan began, his voice steady but warm. "I know the past few weeks have been difficult for everyone. The changes we've gone through haven't been easy, and I want to acknowledge the uncertainty that comes with that." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I also want to be clear about one thing. Armstrong Industries is not just a company. It's a team, and a team is only as strong as the people who make it up. Over the past few weeks, I've seen firsthand how talented, dedicated, and hardworking each of you is. But I've also seen how that talent has been stifled by a culture that didn't value collaboration, respect, or trust." The room was silent, but Ethan could see the nods of agreement from several employees. They had all felt it, the weight of the toxic environment that had held them back. "That's going to change," Ethan said firmly, his voice growing stronger. "Starting today, we're going to rebuild Armstrong Industries into a place where people want to come to work. A place where you feel supported, where your ideas are valued, and where your contributions are recognized." He glanced at Jessica, who nodded before continuing. "We're going to introduce a number of new initiatives aimed at creating a more transparent, collaborative workplace. First, we'll be implementing an open-door policy for management. If you have concerns, ideas, or feedback, I want you to feel comfortable bringing them forward without fear of retaliation." There were murmurs of approval from the team, and Ethan felt a small surge of relief. This was the first step, creating an environment where people felt safe speaking up. "Second," Ethan continued, "we'll be introducing leadership training programs for all managers. No one should be promoted based on their ability to control or intimidate others. Leadership is about support, guidance, and helping your team succeed. Those are the qualities we'll be looking for going forward." This time, the response was more enthusiastic. Several employees smiled, and Ethan could see the flicker of hope in their eyes. They were beginning to believe that things could change. "Finally," Ethan said, his tone softening, "I want to hear from you. This company belongs to all of us, and your input is critical to making it the best it can be. After this meeting, Jessica and I will be available to talk, and we'll be holding smaller focus groups in the coming weeks to gather your thoughts and ideas on how we can improve." Ethan paused, scanning the room. The weight of the moment hung in the air, but it felt different now, lighter, more hopeful. "I know change isn't easy," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "But I believe in this team, and I believe that together we can build something great." For a moment the room was silent, the employees absorbing Ethan's words. Then slowly a few people began to clap. The applause grew, filling the room with a sense of warmth and possibility. Ethan smiled, feeling a rush of emotion. They were with him. They were ready to move forward. As the meeting wrapped up, Ethan stayed behind with Jessica, speaking with employees one-on-one. Matt was one of the first to approach, his face flushed with relief. "You did it," Matt said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You really did it." Ethan smiled, shaking Matt's hand. "We did it, Matt." This was a team effort. Matt grinned, his eyes bright. "Still, I don't think I've ever seen this place like this. People are actually excited to come to work again." "That's the goal," Ethan said, his tone serious but hopeful. "And it's just the beginning." Over the next few weeks, the changes Ethan had promised began to take root. The open-door policy was a success, with employees feeling more comfortable approaching management with their concerns and ideas. Kelsey, now in a more prominent leadership role, worked closely with Ethan and Jessica to ensure that the new leadership training programs were rolled out smoothly. The transformation wasn't immediate. Ethan knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but the signs were promising. Morale was slowly improving, and the team began working together in ways they hadn't before. Collaboration replaced competition, and for the first time in a long time, people felt safe speaking up. One afternoon, Ethan found himself in the break room, grabbing a quick cup of coffee between meetings. He had been so focused on the day-to-day work of rebuilding the company that he hadn't taken a moment to reflect on how far they had come. As he poured his coffee, he overheard a conversation between two employees at a nearby table. They were laughing, talking about an upcoming project with genuine excitement in their voices. It was such a stark contrast to the tense, silent office he had walked into on his first day that it took Ethan a moment to process it. He smiled to himself. This was why he had taken the job. Not for the title, not for the prestige, but to create a place where people could thrive. Kelsey walked into the break room a few minutes later, a stack of reports in hand. She smiled when she saw Ethan, making her way over to join him. "Busy day?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Ethan nodded, his smile widening. "Always. But it's good. I feel like we're finally getting somewhere." Kelsey raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of her coffee. "You think so?" "I do," Ethan said, glancing around the break room. "People are happier. They're talking, collaborating. It's not perfect yet, but we're making progress." Kelsey smiled, leaning against the counter. "You know, when you first came in, I wasn't sure what to make of you. You were quiet, but I could tell you were watching everything, taking it all in." Ethan chuckled softly. "That was the plan. I have to say, you've done a hell of a job," Kelsey said, her voice sincere. "You didn't just take down Ryan, you've actually made things better. People believe in this place again." Ethan felt a surge of pride, but he kept his tone modest. "It wasn't just me. It was the team. People like you, Matt, Jessica, you've all made this possible." Kelsey smiled again, but there was something softer in her expression this time. "Still, you were the one who made it happen. Don't sell yourself short." Ethan nodded, grateful for her words. "Thanks, Kelsey. That means a lot." She gave him a playful nudge. "Just don't get too comfortable. There's still a lot of work to do." Ethan laughed, but he knew she was right. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time since he had started at Armstrong Industries, he felt confident that they were on the right path. A few months later, Armstrong Industries was almost unrecognizable from the company it had been when Ethan first walked through the doors. The leadership training programs had been a success, with several new managers emerging as strong, empathetic leaders. The open-door policy had led to a surge of innovation as employees felt empowered to share their ideas and feedback without fear of retaliation. Ethan's own role within the company had evolved as well. He had become a trusted leader, someone the team could rely on not just for strategic direction, but for support and guidance. People weren't afraid to approach him, to ask for help, or to challenge his ideas. It was the kind of collaborative environment Ethan had always envisioned, and seeing it come to life was more rewarding than he could have ever imagined. One morning, as Ethan was preparing for a leadership meeting, Jessica stopped by his office. She had a bright smile on her face, and Ethan could tell she had good news. "I just got out of a meeting with the board," Jessica said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "They're thrilled with the progress we've made. They've officially greenlit the next phase of our expansion." Ethan grinned, feeling a rush of excitement. "That's great news." "It is," Jessica said, nodding. "They've also made it clear that they want you to continue leading the charge. They trust your vision." Ethan sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of her words. It was a moment of validation, a recognition of all the hard work he and his team had put in to turn Armstrong Industries around. "I couldn't have done it without you," Ethan said sincerely. "You've been my partner through all of this." Jessica smiled warmly. "And am proud to have been part of it." "We've built something incredible here, Ethan." Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. They had done it. They had taken a company that had been on the brink of collapse and turned it into something stronger, something better. But this was just the beginning. As he looked out the window at the bustling city below, Ethan felt a sense of excitement for the future. Armstrong Industries was thriving again, and the possibilities were endless. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. But with the right team, the right vision, and the right leadership, anything was possible. Ethan smiled to himself, ready for whatever came next. A month had passed since Ryan's departure, and Armstrong Industries was beginning to flourish in ways that no one could have anticipated. The office that had once been a place of tension, fear, and manipulation was now filled with collaboration, creativity, and energy. It wasn't just the policies Ethan had implemented, it was the change in attitude, the shift in the very fabric of the company's culture. Ethan had taken his role as a leader seriously from the moment he arrived, but now it felt different. He wasn't just an observer or an undercover investigator anymore. He was a part of the team, and the team was thriving. And yet there was still so much to do. One sunny Friday afternoon, the company gathered in the newly renovated lounge for a casual end-of-week wrap-up session. It was something that had become a tradition since Ethan stepped in a moment for the team to come together, share ideas, and celebrate small victories. The air was filled with laughter and the clink of coffee mugs as people chatted freely, something that had been rare just months ago. Ethan stood by the window looking out at the city skyline. He sipped his coffee, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. It was hard to believe how far they had come. Armstrong Industries was no longer just a job for people. It was becoming a place where they could grow, where they could push their creative boundaries, and where they felt valued. That was his vision from the start, and seeing it unfold before his eyes was deeply fulfilling. As he watched his team interact, Ethan spotted Matt Davis chatting animatedly with a few of the newer hires. Matt, once the target of Ryan's humiliation, had become one of the company's rising stars. His confidence had blossomed, and his ideas had helped push Armstrong's marketing strategies to new heights. Kelsey was nearby, talking with a few of the department heads, her usual calm demeanor now punctuated with laughter as she discussed the upcoming project timelines. She had fully embraced her new leadership role, and her ability to inspire and mentor the team was becoming legendary. Jessica approached Ethan, standing beside him as they watched the scene unfold. "I think we can officially say Armstrong has turned a corner," she said with a satisfied smile. Ethan chuckled softly, nodding in agreement. "It's been a journey, that's for sure. But I think we've built something real here, something that'll last." Jessica took a sip of her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "You know, when you first came in, I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought you'd be like every other manager, come in, make some noise, and then fade into the background. But you've actually made this place better. You care about these people." Ethan looked at her, his expression sincere. "I do care, because I've been where they've been. I know what it's like to feel powerless, to feel like you don't have a voice. I never want anyone here to feel that way again." Jessica smiled, her eyes softening. "Well, you've done more than just give them a voice. You've given them hope, and that's not something they're going to forget." Ethan's chest tightened with emotion, but he kept his expression composed. "Thanks, Jessica. That means a lot." They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the team interact, before Jessica spoke again. "So, what's next for you, Ethan? Now that things are settling down here, are you thinking about the future?" Ethan leaned against the window ledge, considering her question. The truth was, he hadn't really thought much about his own future since taking on the role at Armstrong. He had been so focused on fixing the present that he hadn't had time to look beyond it. "I guess I'm still figuring that out," he said slowly, his voice thoughtful. "There's still a lot I want to do here. We've come a long way, but there's always room for improvement." Jessica smiled knowingly. "You're a builder, Ethan. You see potential in places other people overlook. That's what makes you a great leader." Ethan glanced at her, grateful for her insight. "I appreciate that, Jessica. I really do." They shared a quiet moment of understanding before Jessica stepped away to join the others, leaving Ethan to his thoughts. Later that afternoon, as the office began to wind down for the weekend, Ethan found himself thinking about the relationships that had formed since he started at Armstrong. The team had grown closer in ways he hadn't expected, and while much of that was due to the shared experience of overcoming Ryan's toxic leadership, it was also because of the genuine care they had developed for one another. One relationship in particular had deepened over the past few months, his friendship with Kelsey. After the tumultuous weeks of confronting Ryan and working to turn the company around, Ethan and Kelsey had grown into trusted confidants. They shared a similar drive, a similar passion for seeing people succeed. But there was also something else, an unspoken connection that had developed over time. They understood each other in ways that went beyond the professional. As the last of the team members left the office that evening, Ethan found Kelsey sitting in the quiet break room, reviewing some reports for an upcoming meeting. He grabbed a couple of coffees from the counter and made his way over to her table. "Thought you could use a break," he said, handing her one of the mugs. Kelsey looked up, smiling as she took the coffee. Thanks. I definitely needed this. Ethan sat across from her, leaning back in his chair as they sipped their drinks in comfortable silence. It was moments like this that reminded him how far they had come, not just as a company, but as people. So, Kelsey said after a few minutes, glancing up from her reports, are you ready for the next big challenge? Ethan chuckled softly. There's always another challenge, isn't there? Kelsey smirked, setting her papers aside. Of course, but I think we're ready for it. We've built a strong foundation. Ethan nodded in agreement. I think so too. This team is different now. Stronger. Kelsey's expression softened as she looked at him. And that's because of you, Ethan. You've led by example. You've shown people that they can trust leadership again. Ethan felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, but he kept his tone light. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my rock through all of this. Kelsey smiled, her eyes glinting with warmth. I think we've made a pretty good team. Ethan met her gaze, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them and acknowledgement of everything they had been through together. The connection they had built wasn't just professional anymore. It was personal. They finished their coffees in silence, but the air between them was filled with unspoken promises of friendship, of support, of something deeper that they both understood but didn't need to say out loud. As the evening wore on, they said their goodbyes, knowing they'd be back on Monday, ready to face whatever new challenges came their way. 6 months later, Armstrong Industries was thriving in ways no one could have imagined. The company had expanded into new markets, launched innovative products, and established itself as a leader in its field. But more importantly, the team was stronger than ever. Under Ethan's leadership, Armstrong had become a place where people wanted to work, a place where they could grow, take risks, and succeed. The culture of fear and intimidation was long gone, replaced by a culture of trust, collaboration, and respect. Ethan stood in his office one afternoon, looking out at the bustling city below. He had come to Armstrong with a mission to root out the toxicity and rebuild the company from the ground up. And now, as he looked at everything they had accomplished, he knew they had succeeded. Jessica knocked on his door, stepping into the office with a smile. Got a minute? Ethan turned to face her, nodding. Of course. What's up? She handed him a document, her eyes shining with excitement. I just got this from the board. They're officially offering you a permanent leadership role, here if you want it. Ethan took the document, scanning it quickly. It was exactly what he had been working toward, a long-term leadership position, with the freedom to continue shaping the company's future. But as he read through the offer, he felt a strange sense of hesitation. He had built something incredible at Armstrong, but he wasn't sure if this was where his journey ended. Jessica seemed to sense his uncertainty. You don't have to decide right now, she said gently. Take your time. Whatever you choose, just know that you've made a lasting impact here. Ethan smiled, grateful for her understanding. Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate that. After she left, Ethan sat down at his desk, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. Armstrong Industries was in a good place, and he was proud of the work they had done. But deep down, he knew that he was a builder, a leader who thrived on creating change, on helping people reach their potential. As he stared at the document in front of him, Ethan realized that his journey might not end at Armstrong. There were other companies out there, other teams that needed the kind of leadership he could provide. Maybe it was time for a new challenge. But for now, he was content to stay where he was. There was still work to be done, and Armstrong was still his home.
Ethan smiled to himself, feeling a sense of peace.
Whatever the future held, he knew one thing for sure: the legacy he had built at Armstrong would last for years to come. And that was enough. Thank you so much for sticking with me until the end of this story. If you enjoyed this journey and want to hear more stories about leadership, overcoming adversity, or other inspiring narratives, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss another upload. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and feel free to drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the story. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for more amazing content coming your way. See you in the next one. She would toddle into the nursery, point at the crib, and babble excitedly, as if sensing the excitement in the air. One evening, as Naomi and Ethan sat on the porch after putting Emma to bed, they talked about the changes that were coming and how much their lives had evolved since they first met. "Do you ever think about where we were just a few years ago?" Naomi asked, her voice thoughtful. "Everything we've been through, everything that's changed. It feels like a lifetime ago." Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "I think about it all the time, and I wouldn't change a thing." Naomi laughed softly. "Not even the part where I hated you." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Even that? It brought us here, didn't it?" Naomi nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "It did, and I'm so grateful for that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars twinkle above them. Their journey had been anything but smooth, but they had come out stronger because of it. They had built a life filled with love, purpose, and hope for the future. As they looked toward the horizon, they knew that this new chapter, this new life, was just the beginning of something even more beautiful. The day of their second child's birth arrived in a flurry of excitement and nerves. Naomi went into labor early one morning, and after a rushed drive to the hospital, they found themselves in the familiar but still awe-inspiring experience of bringing a new life into the world. Ethan stayed by Naomi's side throughout the entire process, offering her words of encouragement and holding her hand through every contraction. It was an intense and emotional experience, but they faced it together, just as they had with Emma. When their son, Ethan Jr., was born, Naomi and Ethan were overwhelmed with emotion. The moment they held him in their arms, all the challenges, fears, and uncertainties melted away, replaced by an all-encompassing love that filled their hearts. "He's perfect," Naomi whispered, gazing down at their newborn son. Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with tears of joy, just like his sister. As they held their son, surrounded by the quiet of the hospital room, Naomi and Ethan knew that their family was complete. They had been through so much to get to this point, and now, with two beautiful children and a life filled with purpose, they felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The next few days were filled with visits from family and friends, each one marveling at the newest addition to the family. Emma, still curious about her new brother, gently patted his head and giggled at his tiny hands and feet. Watching their two children together, Naomi and Ethan knew that they had built something beautiful, something that would last for generations. Their love, their commitment to each other, and their dedication to their family had brought them here, and they couldn't wait to see what the future held. With the birth of their second child, Naomi and Ethan entered a new phase of their lives, one filled with the joys and challenges of raising two young children while continuing their work with the Foundation and Cole Enterprises. Though their days were busy and sometimes chaotic, they felt a deep sense of fulfillment in knowing that they were building something lasting, not just for themselves, but for their children and the communities they served. As the years went by, Naomi and Ethan continued to expand the Foundation's reach, opening new offices across the country and even internationally. Their mentorship and financial support programs had helped thousands of small businesses thrive, and their commitment to ethical business practices had earned them widespread respect. Their children, Emma and Ethan Jr., grew up surrounded by love and the values their parents had worked so hard to instill in them: integrity, kindness, and a commitment to helping others. Naomi and Ethan made sure to teach them the importance of giving back, often taking them to Foundation events and showing them firsthand the impact their work was having on people's lives. One evening, as Naomi and Ethan stood together at a gala celebrating the Foundation's 10th anniversary, they took a moment to reflect on everything they had built. The room was filled with people whose lives had been changed by the Foundation, and as they looked out over the crowd, they felt a profound sense of pride. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" Naomi asked, her voice filled with wonder. Ethan smiled, slipping his arm around her waist. "It feels like it's flown by." Naomi nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "Look at all these people, all the lives we've touched. I never imagined we'd be here." Ethan kissed her temple, his heart full. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Naomi turned to him, her expression soft. We have, and I wouldn't change a thing. As the night went on, they danced together, their love for each other stronger than ever. They had built a legacy that honored Naomi's father, helped countless people, and would live on long after they were gone. And as they swayed to the music, surrounded by the people they had touched, and the love they had built, they knew that their journey was far from over. There were still more lives to change, more challenges to face, and more love to give. But for now, they were content in the knowledge that they had created something truly beautiful together. As the night of the gala ended, Naomi and Ethan stood hand in hand, watching the lights dim and the guests slowly leave. The love they had built, the family they cherished, and the legacy they had created with the foundation filled them with an overwhelming sense of pride and peace. They had grown together, turning pain into purpose, and now they were ready for whatever the future held. Ethan smiled, looking at Naomi. Here's to the next chapter, whatever it may bring. Naomi returned his smile, leaning into him. As long as we're together, I know we can face anything. With that, they turned toward the future, confident that they had built a life that would continue to make a difference for years to come. Thank you for joining us on this journey of love, redemption, and growth. If this story touched your heart and inspired you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. We love hearing from you, so share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue to explore the power of storytelling together. She had faced them from the very beginning of her fight for Ethan, and now she was facing them on a larger scale. But she remained steadfast in her belief that restorative justice and empathy were the keys to unlocking a child's potential. One particular challenge arose when a major school district in the South resisted the implementation of restorative practices, despite overwhelming evidence of their effectiveness in other districts. The district's board members argued that their community had different values and that the reforms would undermine authority in the classroom. Vanessa traveled to the district to meet with the board members and teachers, determined to convince them of the benefits of change. She shared stories from schools where students had once been labeled as troublemakers but had flourished under the new system. She brought data that showed how suspensions and dropouts had decreased, while academic performance and engagement had improved. I understand that change is hard, Vanessa said during the meeting, her voice calm but firm. But if we want our children to succeed, we need to create environments where they feel supported, not afraid. Discipline should be about guidance, not punishment. It's about helping students see that they are more than their mistakes. The debate was intense, but by the end of the meeting, several board members had softened. One of them, Mr. Jameson, a veteran educator who had initially been skeptical, approached Vanessa afterward. "I'll admit, I wasn't sold on this at first, Mr. Jameson said, his tone thoughtful, but you've given me a lot to think about. Maybe we've been too focused on controlling kids and not enough on helping them grow." Vanessa smiled. "That's all I ask, that we take a step back and think about what's best for the kids. It's never too late to change." By the end of the year, the district had begun piloting restorative justice programs in several schools. Vanessa knew it would be a long road, but the progress was undeniable. The conversation was changing, and that was the first step toward lasting reform. As Vanessa's influence continued to grow, she found herself in a new role mentoring young advocates who were inspired by her work. Parents, teachers, and students alike sought her guidance, eager to learn how they could bring about change in their own communities. One of those young advocates was Sophie Adams, a passionate college student studying education and social justice. Sophie had been following Vanessa's work since high school and had reached out, asking if she could intern with Every Child Matters. During their first meeting, Sophie was nervous but excited. "I've been following your work for years, Mrs. Parker," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "I want to be part of this movement. I want to help change the system for kids like me, kids who felt like they didn't belong." Vanessa smiled, remembering how she had once felt just as nervous and unsure of her own power. "You're already part of the movement, Sophie. By speaking up, you're making a difference." Under Vanessa's mentorship, Sophie quickly grew into a confident advocate. She traveled with Vanessa to meetings, helped organize events, and even began giving talks of her own. Her energy and passion reminded Vanessa of herself when she first started fighting for Ethan. And it was clear that Sophie had a bright future ahead. During one of their last meetings before Sophie graduated, Vanessa gave her a piece of advice that had guided her throughout her own journey. "Never underestimate the power of your voice," Vanessa said. "Even when it feels like no one is listening, keep speaking up. You never know who's hearing your words and how they might be inspired by them." Sophie nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I won't forget that. Thank you, Mrs. Parker. You've changed my life." Vanessa watched as Sophie went on to launch her own advocacy campaign, focused on reforming education policies in underfunded urban schools. It was a reminder that the fight was being carried forward, not just by Vanessa, but by a new generation of leaders. As Every Child Matters gained international recognition, Vanessa began receiving invitations to speak at global conferences on education reform. Countries around the world were struggling with similar issues: outdated disciplinary practices, unequal access to education, and the need for more inclusive teaching methods. One of the most impactful invitations came from the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization UNESCO. They wanted Vanessa to be a keynote speaker at their Global Education Summit, where leaders from over 50 countries would gather to discuss the future of education worldwide. Vanessa felt both honored and overwhelmed. The summit represented the culmination of everything she had worked for, and it was an opportunity to take her message to a global audience. During her speech, Vanessa spoke not just about the changes she had helped bring about in the U.S., but about the universal need for empathy and understanding in education. She emphasized that every child, no matter where they were in the world, deserved to feel valued and supported. "Education is the foundation of our future," Vanessa said, her voice resonating through the large conference hall. "But it's not enough to teach facts and figures. We must teach compassion, resilience, and the belief that every child has something unique to offer. When we create environments that nurture those qualities, we're not just preparing students for school, we're preparing them for life." Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and Vanessa left the summit knowing that her work had now reached a global stage. The fight for educational equity and justice was no longer confined to one country, it was a movement that spanned the globe. Years later, Vanessa found herself back where it all began, at Lincoln Elementary, the school where she had first stood up for Ethan and challenged the system that had failed him. The school had been transformed in the years since, becoming a model for restorative justice and inclusive education. The hallways were filled with laughter and energy, and the students walked with a confidence that was once absent. Vanessa had been invited to the school's annual Student Achievement Day, a celebration of the students' academic and personal growth. As she walked through the halls, she passed by a group of students who were part of a peer mentoring program, that had been inspired by Ethan's own work as a mentor years ago. One of the students, Maya, approached Vanessa with a shy smile. "Are you Mrs. Parker? My teacher told us about you. She said you helped make this school what it is today." Vanessa smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I guess you could say that. But it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people working together to make things better." Maya's eyes lit up. "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people." Vanessa knelt down to meet Maya's eyes. "You already are helping, just by being kind and standing up for what's right. Keep doing that, and you'll change the world." As the ceremony began, Vanessa took her seat in the audience, watching as the students were called up to receive their awards. When Ethan's name was announced as a special guest speaker, Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't known he would be speaking. Ethan stood at the podium, looking out at the young faces in the crowd. He spoke about his own journey, how he had once been a scared little boy, isolated and unsure of himself, but how his mother's fight for him had given him the courage to believe in himself. "My mom taught me that we all have the power to make a difference," Ethan said, his voice steady. "No matter how small we feel, no matter how big the challenges seem, we can create change. We can lift each other up, And that's what I want each of you to remember: you matter, and your voice matters. As Ethan finished his speech, Vanessa felt tears in her eyes. It was a full-circle memento reminder of how far they had come and how much they had accomplished together. The world had changed because of their fight, and the future was brighter than ever. As the ceremony ended and the students filed out, Vanessa and Ethan walked together through the halls of Lincoln Elementary, side by side. They had started this journey together, and they would continue it forever, fighting for the belief that every child, everywhere, deserved a chance to shine. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.